When Rachel finished speaking, she looked over at Kevin and saw that he had just finished his call. Garrett objected to Rachel's put-downs and snapped back at her. "What do you know? Listen, I'm Lily's new boyfriend and Aunt Dorothy wants us to get married. So what do you say to that?" "Do you think you deserve her?" Rachel turned and put her hand on Lily's arm. "Lily, how can you even be with a schmuck like this?" Rachel felt helpless. She never expected Lily to actually abandon Kevin. Then she thought to herself, maybe she still doesn't know who Kevin really is. Lily looked directly at Kevin and narrowed her eyes. My mother arranged it all. She still couldn't say no to her family. Hearing this, Rachel instantly understood and shook her head helplessly. Garrett didn't like Rachel's reaction at all. "Lily, your friend seems to have already made up her mind about me. What have I done wrong?" By then, Kevin had finished his call and walked back over to them. He stared intently at Garrett. But before Kevin could say anything, Garrett spoke again. "What are you still standing here for? This isn't a grocery store. Not everyone can just walk in here off the street." "Well, what if I want to buy one of your properties?" Kevin asked nonchalantly. "With what?" Garrett asked. "Did Lily give you some of her money?" Kevin almost laughed out loud when he heard that. Why would he ask Lily for money? Lily interrupted them and spoke up to Garrett. "You have no idea what you're talking about. No, Kevin didn't ask me for any money." Kevin snickered a little and said, "I don't really like you, Garrett, but your company does have some good properties. You know, I think I'll buy the best one of your listings," Kevin continued. "Since you're the manager here, you can probably answer this. Which one is the best?" "Wow, Aunt Dorothy said you're worthless, but you sure are good at bragging," Garrett said. He walked to a model on a table by the front window. Pointing at the beautiful tower, he said, "This is the Corwin Tower. You've probably seen it going up a few blocks from here. The penthouse is available for anyone who can afford the price tag, $8 million. Garrett turned around and gave Kevin a pretentious look and asked him, "Can you afford it?" Kevin saw that Rachel was about to say something and he put his finger to his lips to ask her to be quiet. "That's what I thought," Garrett said. "This would be a good time for you to leave." Kevin didn't say anything. He just smiled. "Who said I can't afford it?" he replied. "Didn't you hear what I said? The penthouse costs $8 million, Garrett said in a very snotty tone. Kevin ignored him. He just took out a black card from his wallet and looked at the rude agent who had greeted him when he walked in. Then he walked over and handed it to a different agent, the one who was standing near the reception desk. "Wait!" Garrett stopped her as she was about to go into the back room and swipe the card. "Isn't this your first day at work? That's not the proper procedure." That's when the agent realized that Kevin's card didn't even have a name on it. "I guess the only way to find out if my card is good is to swipe it," Kevin said confidently. Just then, Garrett's phone rang. When he saw the caller ID, he quickly stepped away and answered the call. Kevin spoke calmly to the agent, who was still holding onto his card, unsure of what to do next. "It looks like your manager is on the phone. Go ahead and swipe my card," he smiled and added, "for the full amount." "Yes, sir. Please wait a moment." She didn't actually believe that Kevin had that much money on his card, but she thought she would give it a try anyway. "Where did you get that black card?" Lily asked him. Lily knew about this type of card from work. Her boss had negotiated with the CEO from an international corporation who used it for major expenses. She decided to look into it and found out as much information as she could. It was even more exclusive than the Sapphire Bank card. Way more. So when Kevin took out the card, she recognized it at a glance. The agent returned after a couple of minutes. She was incredibly excited. "Sir, I'm sorry to keep you waiting." "Is the transaction complete?" Kevin asked as he reached out to take his card back. "Yes, sir," she said with a huge smile. "You are now the new owner of the top 2 floors of the Corwin Tower. This is my first day, so I'm sure someone else will go over the paperwork with you." She was new to the company, but one thing she did know was she would be getting an enormous commission. "What did you just say?" The rude agent, the one who had met Kevin earlier at the door, was shocked. Miss Moore, this gentleman has just bought the Corwin Tower penthouse, and he paid in full, she explained to her trainer. The young woman could barely contain her excitement. And I get a 2% commission. Kevin looked at her name tag. Well, Lisa, it looks like you earned $160,000 today. Garrett finished his call and walked back to them. You still haven't left? He asked Kevin. Kevin just grinned. Garrett, in his smug way, told him, If you can buy the Corwin Tower penthouse, I will personally kiss your ass. Are you sure you want to make that bet? Remember, there are a lot of witnesses here, Kevin replied. Yes, that's what I said. Garrett straightened up and lifted his chin in a very snooty way. Rachel started to laugh hysterically. By now there was a fairly large group of employees and customers watching. They'd been drawn in by the argument between Kevin and Garrett, and they didn't want to miss the show. But Mr. Butcher, this gentleman has already bought the Corwin Tower penthouse, Lisa told him. What did you say? Garrett spun around and looked at her. It's not a mistake, sir. This gentleman just bought the property. His credit was good, she replied meekly. Garrett's jaw dropped. Will that be the left cheek or the right? Kevin inquired politely. Never. Not for someone like you, Garrett exploded. The people in the crowd began to whisper, and some of them were even giggling. Are you sure? Kevin asked him. Nope, and there's not a thing you can do about it, Garrett replied. How dare you talk to me like this? I'm not afraid of you. I work for the Williams Corporation. Wow, I'm really impressed, Kevin said in an obviously sarcastic tone. But the onlookers were definitely impressed. They started talking about how important the Williams Corporation was and how they were building all the high-end real estate in the area. Rachel, who had already seen the extent of Kevin's influence, couldn't believe what she was hearing. Yes, he said in a very matter-of-fact way. I'm very high up in the organization. A good-for-nothing like you wouldn't even be able to get through our company's gate. Just then, everyone turned to see a distinguished-looking middle-aged man rush through the front door and race up to Garrett saying, You are no longer an employee of the Williams Corporation. Please turn in your access badge. Director Turner, what are you doing here? Garrett didn't understand why one of the Williams directors was in his office. It's a good thing I came down here. I wouldn't know how you treat our customers. After saying this, Turner pulled Garrett's name badge off his suit jacket. Then he walked up to Kevin. Lily, who thought that Turner was about to turn his wrath on Kevin, stepped between them and said, Director Turner, please don't misunderstand. Kevin didn't deliberately cause any trouble here. Turner knew that Kevin liked to keep a low profile. When he noticed that his CEO was giving him a look that said, Don't tell them who I am, he smiled kindly at Lily and told her, Ma'am, that's not my intention at all. As a matter of fact, I want to apologize to this gentleman. The crowd, especially the employees, realized that Turner was one of the Williams executives. Lily nodded, even though she was still so confused by the whole situation. Turner approached Kevin very politely and said, Sir, I'm really sorry that Mr. Butcher was put in a position of authority at our company. He was obviously very unprofessional toward you. Please accept our apologies. On the way over to the office, Turner had gotten a call from Miss Wilson, Kevin's chief of staff. She explained the situation and also sent the video surveillance from the office's security system, and he watched it on his phone. It was damning evidence. I accept your apology, Mr. Turner, but if you don't fire this man in the future... Kevin didn't finish his sentence. Of course, sir. Turner understood right away what Kevin meant. He turned around to face Garrett and then pointed at the door. Please leave. Director Turner, please, you can't fire me. Vice President Ambrose is my uncle. Let me call him. Garrett pulled out his phone and called his uncle. Uncle Ed, help! Director Turner said he wants to fire me. Garrett shouted into his phone. Don't panic, Garrett. Where are you? I'll be right there. Everyone could hear Mr. Ambrose's deep voice coming from the earpiece. Turner snatched the phone from Garrett's hand and told him, We're in the Corwin Tower sales office. When you get here, we'll all be in Mr. Butcher's office. Then he hung up the phone. Turner looked at Kevin and said, "Sir, I hate to trouble you, but could you please come with me to the office?" He continued to explain. "The vice president is a reasonable man. As long as you explain to him what happened, I think he'll understand the situation." Although Turner was an important manager in the company, his position was only slightly higher than Garrett's. He had to be careful not to provoke someone like Vice President Ambrose. "Edward Ambrose?" Kevin asked. "That's him," Turner nodded. Kevin looked over at Lily and then walked towards the elevator with Turner and Garrett. "Rachel, do you think something will happen to Kevin?" Lily asked nervously. "Don't worry, Kevin will be fine." Rachel patted Lily's back to comfort her. Rachel wasn't worried about Kevin at all. However, Kevin had already told her his secret, and she didn't dare to tell Lily his true identity, not just because she had given her word, but because she didn't want her husband to lose his job. The elevator stopped on the 14th floor where Garrett's office was located. "Director Turner, I advise you to leave before my uncle arrives. You're only a regional manager and there's no need for you to lose your job over this." Garrett sat back in his chair and put his feet on the desk. "Garrett, do you really think your uncle can save you this time?" Turner said as he shook his head. "I sure do. My uncle is the vice president of the company. He can easily fire you. If you want my advice, you shouldn't help this nobody. Remember, my uncle also has the power to promote you." "Does Edward Ambrose really have so much authority in Williams Media?" Kevin asked. Garrett was surprised. "Do you know my uncle?" Kevin ignored his question. "It seems like the company isn't as well organized as I thought," Kevin said to himself. "I really don't know what Lily sees in you," Garrett sneered. "I don't care what you think, and don't forget, she's still my wife," Kevin said. "And one more thing, you don't get to call Lily by her name." "You're nobody. You couldn't hold a candle to me." Garrett's expression showed his disdain. "That's enough, Garrett," Turner snapped. "Director Turner, my uncle will be here soon." He said this confidently without even looking at him. When his uncle arrived, he planned to have him make Turner apologize. "How dare you fire me, especially in front of my employees? You won't get away with this," Garrett thought to himself. A few minutes later, the office door opened forcefully. In a deep, arrogant voice, Garrett's uncle Ambrose snarled, "Mark Turner, how dare you fire one of my employees?" Kevin was waiting with Turner in Garrett's office for Ambrose to show up. He was one of the vice presidents at Williams Media, and he was also Garrett's uncle. Minutes later, he angrily burst in the door. Garrett smiled when he saw his uncle walk in the room. He quickly ran up to him and said, "Uncle Ed, thanks for getting here so fast." Then Garrett lied about what had just happened in the sales office downstairs. As Ambrose listened to his nephew's story, his eyes fell on Kevin. "So this horrible situation is all your fault?" Ambrose asked him. "What did you say?" Kevin replied with a smile. Ambrose's eyes narrowed as he responded. "How dare you talk to me like that? You sure have a lot of nerve." "You'd be surprised at how much nerve I've got," Kevin said as he sat down on the sofa. Garrett pointed his finger at Kevin and shouted, "Who do you think you are? Nobody said you could sit down." Turner could only shake his head. Since Ambrose was already here, it meant the whole thing was out of his hands. "There's no quarrel between us, Mr. Turner, wouldn't you agree?" Ambrose asked him. Before Turner could say anything, Garrett whined. "But Uncle Ed, he said he wanted to fire me." Garrett folded his arms on his chest and looked at Turner arrogantly. "Is this true?" Ambrose said with a frown. "Yes, Uncle Ed, not only did he say he wanted to fire me, he embarrassed me in front of all the customers and even my employees," Garrett blubbered. "I told him you're my uncle, but he still wouldn't listen. He obviously doesn't have any respect for you." When Ambrose heard this, he frowned and looked over at Turner. "Mr. Ambrose, I've seen the surveillance footage from the showroom. It proves that this whole mess is entirely Garrett's fault. If you let me show it to you, you'll see that the company has no choice," Turner explained. "There's another choice that you seem to have ignored." Ambrose pointed toward the office door and said, "Mark Turner, as vice president of Williams Media, I must inform you that you have been terminated." Garrett smiled broadly as he saw the look of dejection on Turner's face. "Turner, I told you this would happen," Garrett said with contempt. But if you make this worthless piece of crap apologize to me, I'll ask my uncle to keep you in the company." "Mr. Ambrose, you're quite an executive," Kevin said to Ambrose flatly. "Who said you could speak?" Garrett asked as he walked over to Kevin. "There's nothing you can do about this, and your buddy Turner can't do anything either." Kevin was getting tired of Garrett and got to the point. "What are you asking for?" When Garrett heard this, he smiled, thinking that Kevin was afraid. "It's simple," he said. "All I want is an apology. Apologize for being a worthless piece of crap." You could have heard a pin drop. Even Garrett's uncle felt that he had gone too far this time. But since Ambrose already had gone to the trouble to rush over to the office, he had to follow through on his threat. "Garrett, that's enough," Turner said in exasperation. Ambrose and Garrett didn't know it, but he was under orders to protect Kevin. He couldn't possibly let Kevin be humiliated like this and then report back to his director. "Turner, this is none of your business. To tell you the truth, I've never liked you," Garrett said arrogantly. "You know what? You can apologize too." Kevin stood up and walked slowly up to Edward Ambrose. "Are you sure you want to continue to let him do whatever he wants?" Kevin asked in an unusually confident tone. For some reason, when Ambrose looked into Kevin's eyes, he felt extremely uneasy. Garrett came up to Kevin from behind and grabbed his shoulder. "Didn't you hear what I said?" In a flash, Kevin turned around and defended himself by pushing Garrett away. Garrett, in a daze, rubbed his chin and moaned. "How dare you hit me? You'll pay for this. Remember, the Butcher family didn't get its reputation for taking crap from people like you." "Young man, aren't you going a little too far?" Ambrose asked Kevin. "Why don't you go downstairs and ask all the witnesses who's going too far?" Kevin replied. Ambrose responded sternly. "It looks like this isn't going to end peacefully." "I'm curious. How do you expect it to end?" Kevin retorted. "It's quite simple. You're going to apologize to Mr. Butcher, then you're going to give him an additional $75,000 to compensate him for all the trouble you've caused," Ambrose declared. Turner opened his mouth to complain, but Ambrose slapped him on the cheek before he could say anything. "You have no voice here," Ambrose told him. "You are no longer a Williams employee. If you don't leave now, I'll call security and have you thrown out." Seeing Ambrose strike Turner like that, Kevin decided that he'd had enough of this. "Mr. Ambrose, do you always hit employees during company meetings?" Then he added in a sarcastic tone, "You know, HR frowns on this kind of behavior." Ambrose answered, "If you can hit my nephew, then I can slap Turner," he continued. "Now apologize and give my nephew his compensation. Otherwise, you won't like what happens next." Kevin didn't answer. He just stared at him as he considered his options. "Uncle, finish him off!" Garrett shouted angrily. Then he took out his phone and made a call. "Mr. Foster, where are you? Someone else is threatening to beat me up. Hurry up and bring some of your men to my office." After Garrett finished speaking, he hung up and turned to Kevin. "Now you're going to get your legs broken," he roared. "Well, you can try," Kevin replied. Garrett made a fist and started to take a swing at Kevin, but before he could even hit him, Kevin gave him a hard slap in the face. Garrett staggered and fell back into his chair. Kevin was surprised at how hard he had hit Garrett. He was only going to give him a slap to bring him back to his senses, but he was feeling a lot stronger than usual. "You shouldn't have done that," Ambrose snarled. "Did you like that? That's how you hit Turner just now," Kevin said calmly. Turner stared at Kevin blankly. He was starting to see that there was more to Kevin than meets the eye. Ambrose pulled out his phone and made another call to Foster. "Where are you? Get up to Garrett's office right away." Then he put his phone back in his pocket. "So, it looks like you plan to beat me to death, Mr. Ambrose," Kevin commented dryly. "Apologize now or you won't make it out of here in one piece. You only have these two options." Ambrose's eyes were burning with anger. "What if I don't choose either one?" Kevin said. At that moment, the office door opened. A very professional-looking woman walked in, followed by a group of executives in suits. She spoke to Ambrose directly. "Well, Mr. Vice President, are you working hard today?" Ambrose forced a smile when he saw her. "Miss Wilson, what brings you here today?" Since Kevin hadn't been showing up to work much lately, Ambrose had taken advantage of the situation and passed along a lot of his work to Miss Wilson. Even though Ambrose was one of the company's vice presidents, He still didn't have as much authority as Miss Wilson. She didn't even look at Ambrose, but instead walked straight over to Kevin. "Sir, I'm sorry I'm late," Miss Wilson said as she gave Kevin a very sincere handshake. "Miss Wilson, what did you just call him?" Ambrose asked as he stared at Kevin in shock. She turned around and gave him a very sharp look. "Mr. Ambrose, this is the new chairman of the Williams Group." When he heard this, Ambrose's forehead began to sweat, and he started to hyperventilate. Garrett stared at Kevin in disbelief. "Our CEO," Edward Ambrose said. He couldn't hide the panic in his voice. "I'm flattered to hear you call me by my correct title, Mr. Ambrose." Kevin paused and looked him straight in the eye before continuing. "I believe you were just saying something about kicking me out if I didn't apologize to Mr. Butcher." Ambrose shivered. "Sir, I didn't know who you were. Please accept my sincerest apologies." After Ambrose said this, he glared at his nephew. "So if I understand correctly, if I weren't the CEO, you would have had me thrown out in the street?" Kevin asked. Ambrose didn't know how to answer. Then he turned and shouted at his nephew, "Get over here!" Garrett was still rubbing his cheek as he slowly walked up to Kevin. "Sir." Garrett couldn't even look Kevin in the eyes. "Go ahead, finish your apology," Ambrose said as he pushed his nephew forward like he was a little boy. Garrett's lip quivered and he said, "Sir, I was wrong." Kevin looked at Garrett, then turned around and stared at Ambrose. When Ambrose saw Kevin staring at him like that, he became furious with his nephew for putting him in this position. He turned around and slapped him right in the face. "Look at all the trouble you've caused. Do you still want the CEO to apologize to you?" Ambrose said as he gave Garrett a couple more smacks. He turned around and addressed Kevin again. "Sir, my nephew has made a serious error in judgment. His behavior is inexcusable. Please, let me handle this." Kevin glanced at Garrett, who was sprawled on the couch rubbing his cheek in pain. It looked like Ambrose may have knocked out one of his teeth. "Well, that takes care of Mr. Butcher, but Mr. Ambrose, I believe you made a few threats of your own," Kevin replied. Suddenly, the office door was violently kicked open. A man walked in with a few stocky young men. "Mr. Ambrose, why did you call us here in such a hurry? What's going on?" Foster asked as he stood there confused. "What are you doing here?" Ambrose yelled. "Sir, did I do something wrong? Why are you yelling at me?" Foster asked. Now he was even more confused. Ambrose wanted Kevin to forgive him, so he acted like this was all a big mistake. "Who told you to kick the door open? And why did you bring so many men in here?" Foster didn't know how to answer. He'd only rushed over because Ambrose's call sounded so urgent. Ambrose saw that he needed to get rid of the gangsters, so he said, "I'm fine. This is a simple misunderstanding. Please take your men and leave." Foster shook his head in confusion and left with his men. Then Ambrose walked to the door and slowly closed it. It was the exact opposite of his attitude when he'd burst into the office a while before. "Sir," Ambrose began to speak in a much more respectful tone as he walked back to face Kevin. "I don't want anything like this to happen again," Kevin said as he put his hand on Ambrose's shoulder. Then Kevin walked over to Garrett and sat down next to him. He said, "So, Mr. Butcher, are you still going to have my legs broken?" "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know who you were," Garrett said in defense of his actions. Kevin slowly stood up. He looked down at Garrett and asked him, "So this is how you apologize?" Ambrose was disappointed in his nephew, but Garrett understood what Kevin meant. After taking a deep breath, Garrett struggled to stand up. Then he said, with as much sincerity as he was capable of showing, "Sir, I was wrong." "I'm sorry, your voice was too soft. I couldn't hear you clearly," Kevin said with a slight smirk. "Mr. Williams, I'm sorry. Please forgive me." His eyes were welling up with tears. Kevin turned to Miss Wilson and said firmly, "Edward Ambrose is demoted but will continue to work in the company. His original position will be taken over by Mark Turner. Garrett Butcher is terminated." After giving her these instructions, Kevin left the office without even looking back. When he got to the first floor, Lily and Rachel were still waiting for him. Lily immediately walked up to him, touched his arm, and asked, "Are you all right?" Kevin looked at her in surprise. This was the first time he could remember Lily showing so much concern for him. Then Kevin smiled and replied, "Of course I'm fine. Vice President Ambrose, who works for Williams, came over to find out what had happened. Then he apologized to me." "Lily, I told you he'd be fine," Rachel said. But when she saw Kevin looking at her, she quickly closed her mouth and didn't say anything else that might divulge his secret. "Where have you been for the past 2 days?" Lily asked in a tone that was mixed with a little concern but a lot of curiosity. "I found a job," he explained. "The salary is pretty good and it also provides food and lodging." "That's pretty good." A smile suddenly appeared on Lily's face. At the same time, Lily felt a great sense of relief. She was starting to feel that Kevin was finally willing to make progress. "Yes," Kevin said calmly. Rachel almost laughed out loud. Knowing Kevin's real identity, she thought the idea of the new CEO of Williams Media going out to find a job was hilarious. Suddenly, Lily got a puzzled look on her face. "Kevin, don't you plan to come home?" She wasn't sure why she'd said this. They hadn't been getting along for a long time, but now, after being apart for just 2 days, she felt uneasy. Kevin thought about it for a while and then replied, "Let's talk about it later. I've been a little busy lately. It's rare to have a boss who trusts me this much. He even asked me to come down here and buy a home for him." Lily didn't ask who it was. After all, there were a lot of rich people in Chicago. Then she asked nervously, "Why did you take my place as Bradley's hostage? Weren't you afraid?" Kevin looked at Lily lovingly and replied, "You're my wife." Lily felt her heart flutter. Then her phone rang. Glancing at the caller ID, she saw that it was from her company. Lily said a few words and hung up. "I'm sorry, but I have to go now. There's something I need to take care of at work." "Take good care of yourself." After Lily said this, her eyes started to fill up with tears. "Sure. You take care of yourself too. See you in a few days," Kevin said. Then Lily tugged on Rachel's arm and turned around quickly to leave. Kevin was happy that his last conversation with Lily had gone so well. Now that he was the owner of the penthouse at Corwin Tower, he needed to spend a few days buying everything he needed. It was an enormous 2-floor apartment with its own private elevator, so it took a lot of effort. After he'd arranged everything, he had a little free time. So he called Lily early in the morning. "Hi, Kevin. When are you coming back?" she asked. She didn't even give him a chance to answer. "I'll be waiting for you at home." Lily hung up the phone with a smile. Once Lily knew that Kevin would be back later that day, she decided not to go to work. Instead, she washed up and got dressed in one of her nicest outfits. "Why are you letting that guy come back? Didn't he abandon you?" Dorothy looked at Lily, who was sitting on the sofa combing her hair, and said, "I went to a lot of trouble to introduce you to Garrett Butcher. How did that go?" "Don't ask me again. I'm not going to divorce Kevin," Lily said without looking up. This really upset Dorothy. "Why did you ever marry him? He lived in our house for free for almost 3 years. All he did was offer himself in a hostage exchange, and now you're ready to run back to him." Lily put down her comb and let out a sigh. "Kevin saved you too, or have you forgotten that?" "You want me to thank him for such a small thing? Never!" Dorothy slapped the table hard. Dorothy continued her tirade. "Let me ask you this. During the 3 years you and Kevin were married, were you ever happy? Can he give you the life you want? Every other wealthy family I know has successful son-in-laws. Some of them are worth millions. How does Kevin compare to them?" Dorothy's complaining was interrupted by the sound of an engine out in the street. She looked out the window and was astonished to see Kevin getting out of a brand new sports car. "I'm back." Kevin smiled and waved at Dorothy. Dorothy looked at Kevin in shock and then looked at the sports car parked outside. "Kevin?" Dorothy asked in disbelief. Kevin nodded slightly at Dorothy. Then he walked into the living room and said to Lily with a smile, "I'm back." Lily looked at the sports car parked in front of the house. She wasn't sure what to make of it. "That's my boss's car. Because I'm taking the day off, he lent it to me," Kevin explained with a smile. Before Lily could say anything, Dorothy interrupted. "Ah, so it's your boss's car. For a second I thought you were doing better financially." Kevin shook his head a little and smirked when he heard her say that. He was used to Dorothy's attitudes towards him, and it looked like things hadn't changed. "Still a good-for-nothing, I see." Dorothy looked at Kevin's indifferent expression, and it only made her more irritated. Dorothy turned around and looked at Lily as she continued her attack on Kevin. "I just don't understand. What are you waiting for? Wasn't Garrett Butcher good enough for you? This is making me sick." Mind your own business, Mom, Lily said with a sigh. He's found a job now, so I want to give him a chance to show me he's changed. Dorothy didn't argue with her. She just glared at Kevin and went into her room. So, we're not getting a divorce? Kevin asked Lily with a smile. That depends on how things go, Lily said very calmly. Kevin didn't say anything else. No matter what decision Lily ended up making, he would respect her wishes. When he thought about it, Lily had always put a lot of pressure on him. Lily looked over at Kevin a couple of times. For some reason, she was starting to blush. I'm going to head upstairs to rest. Kevin followed her upstairs. After he entered the bedroom, he saw how messy it was. It looks like no one has cleaned in a few days. He began tidying up. Dorothy walked in and saw Kevin cleaning like everything was back to normal. She angrily took out her phone and dialed Garrett's number. Aunt Dorothy, what do you want? His voice wasn't very warm. Dorothy didn't pay any attention to that and got straight to the point. Garrett, did you have a nice date with Lily? How are you guys getting along? Dorothy's tone was extremely gentle, as if Garrett had already become her son-in-law. Garrett sounded very anxious. Aunt Dorothy, I think Lily and Kevin are a match made in heaven. I don't want to come between them. This really surprised Dorothy. She asked him, Are you okay, Garrett? What are you talking about? Kevin's nobody compared to you. Aunt Dorothy, I'm absolutely serious. If you see Kevin again, please tell him I said hi. You can also tell him that I wish him and Lily many years of happiness. Dorothy looked at her phone with a confused expression on her face. She was wondering if she'd called the wrong number. Garrett, is there something wrong? Dorothy asked hesitantly. No, Aunt Dorothy, there's nothing wrong. Nothing at all. I still have some work to do, so I have to get going. Bye. Then he immediately hung up the phone. Dorothy angrily threw her phone onto the bed. She really didn't understand what was going on with Garrett. She was certain that he had said that he was interested in Lily. Suddenly, there was a knock on the front door. Dorothy frowned slightly and walked over to answer it. Who is it? Hi, Aunt Dorothy. She opened the door and Rachel walked in. Hi, Rachel. Please have a seat, Dorothy said with a smile. She turned around and shouted upstairs. Lily, Rachel is here. When Lily walked downstairs, she sat down on the sofa next to Rachel and started chatting with her. Dorothy shouted upstairs again. Kevin, what are you doing? Come down here. When Rachel heard this, her smile turned into a look of surprise. She gulped and asked Lily, Is Kevin home? Ever since Rachel found out who Kevin really was, she didn't dare to come over and visit Lily. The night before, when she was talking to Lily on a video call, she found out that Kevin hadn't been home in a few days, so she figured it was safe to come over and hang out with her friend. She certainly didn't expect Kevin to actually be there. He just came back today. Lily didn't notice the change in Rachel's expression. Just as Rachel was about to find an excuse to head home, she saw Kevin walking slowly down the stairs. When he saw Rachel, he gave her a slight smile. What are you still standing there for? Make a cup of coffee for Rachel, Dorothy snapped at Kevin. But he just stood there on the bottom step, leaning lightly on the handrail. Rachel stood up and said, Oh, you don't need to go to any trouble. I'm not thirsty. Lily frowned at her friend. Rachel, you don't seem to be yourself. Are you okay? Lily asked her with a hint of doubt in her voice. That's possible. Maybe it's because I didn't get enough sleep last night, Rachel explained. But Dorothy also felt that something was wrong. She thought about the strange conversation with Garrett and now Rachel's odd behavior. Why is everyone so afraid of this bum? Dorothy thought to herself. Then go to the fridge and get her some fruit, Dorothy barked at Kevin. No need, Aunt Dorothy. I still have some things to do, so I have to head home. I just stopped by to say hi. Rachel was afraid of what she'd say if she stayed there any longer. Kevin hadn't said a thing, but Rachel couldn't stand the pressure. Oh, don't leave so soon. Why don't you stay a little longer? Kevin asked with a smile. I really have something to take care of, so I've got to run, Rachel said apologetically. Okay, we won't keep you, Lily said. She looked at Kevin and then back at Rachel and asked her, How did you get here? I didn't see your car. It's in the shop, Rachel forced a smile. I'll just take a cab or something. You don't need to pay for a ride, Dorothy said. Kevin's got his boss's car today. He can drive you home. Rachel looked at Dorothy in surprise. Didn't she know who Kevin really was? That's too much trouble. I'll be fine. Rachel was on the verge of tears. Rachel, why are you being so polite to him? He'll only hang around here and do nothing, Dorothy replied. Kevin sighed. He pulled his keys out of his pocket and said, It's no problem, Rachel. Let's go. At this point, Rachel had no choice. She grabbed her purse, said goodbye to Lily and Dorothy, and headed out the door with Kevin. As she got in, she noticed that Kevin's new car was a Maserati coupe, a pretty modest choice considering what he could have bought. After a few minutes, Rachel said timidly, You can just drop me here, Kevin. I can really take a taxi home. Kevin steered with one hand while he adjusted the stereo with the other. What did you just call me? Have you forgotten already? Boss, Rachel said softly. That's better. Kevin smiled and said, Don't be so nervous, Rachel. As long as we're already out, I might as well drop you off at home. Anyway, I don't have anything else going on today. Thank you, boss, Rachel said. Kevin laughed and turned onto Michigan Avenue. While he was waiting for a traffic light, he heard a voice in the car next to him. Isn't that Kevin? So you're driving a fancy sports car now? Kevin looked over and saw that it was Jason. Unfortunately, traffic was starting to back up, so he couldn't hit the gas and get away from him. Kevin, you sure are living well now. That car must have cost what, $200,000? After Jason said that, he looked in the passenger seat and saw Rachel. I see you found a lovely rich woman to support you. And who is this pretty lady? Don't bring her into it, Kevin said coldly. Kevin, you're just a poser, Jason replied. In fact, when Jason saw Rachel, he figured the sports car was really hers. Then he assumed Kevin had found a rich woman to pay for his lavish lifestyle. Kevin, you really are amazing. You've had free room and board for 3 years with Lily, and now you're looking for another rich woman to support you? I should have known. Jason sneered and revved his engine. Because Jason was making so much noise, the pedestrians who were waiting to cross the street heard everything. Their comments were pretty insulting. So he's married into the Joneses family? Another commented, I'm a handsome guy. Why can't I find a rich woman to buy me a car? This was pretty frustrating for Kevin, and he started to lose his temper. But Rachel, who had been sitting calmly in the front passenger seat, got even more angry than Kevin. The traffic wasn't moving at all, so she opened the car door and walked over to Jason's window. Suddenly, everyone heard a loud slap. You actually hit me? Do you know who I am? Jason was a little surprised. The young woman who was sitting in Jason's car was also shocked. She said to Rachel, This is one of the most important people in the Jones family. So what? What are you going to do about it? Rachel glared at Jason. Because Jason had no class, he said loudly, Not only does this beauty have a hot body, she also has a hot temper. Then he added, She really ought to be with me. The bystanders who were anxiously waiting for the light to change spoke quietly to each other, but nobody said anything that might risk provoking Rachel. Rachel glanced at Kevin and saw the smile on his face. This gave her even more confidence. With the support of Williams Media CEO, what was there for her to be afraid of? She put her hands on her hips and said, You're nothing compared to Mr. Williams. Mr. Williams? Jason wondered. The onlookers were stunned. Jason also looked surprised. Rachel turned around and walked back to Kevin. She leaned in the passenger window and said, Boss, I did well, didn't I? You did really well. Kevin smiled with satisfaction. Boss, it's backed up all the way to Lakeshore Drive. You don't have to take me home. I don't want to waste your time. Rachel continued. I'll go a few blocks west and catch a ride. Don't worry about me. Okay, be careful, Kevin nodded slightly. Rachel reached in, took her purse off the front seat, and crossed the street. The onlookers broke up pretty quickly when the light changed and the traffic was able to inch forward. As the car started to move, Jason yelled at Kevin, Lily's going to hear about this. Have you already forgotten the lesson that Drake taught you? Kevin reminded him. The lane opened up in front of Kevin, so he put the accelerator down and jumped forward, finally ending the conversation. Lily must have pulled some strings to buy him a sports car with our family money. Jason whined as he watched Kevin's taillights disappear ahead of him. If Kevin had heard what Jason said, he'd definitely find it funny. He just bought this car yesterday, and the Jones family hadn't paid a cent. As long as he was downtown, Kevin decided to head to his office and wait for traffic to clear. He sat down at his desk and sent Lily a text saying that he wouldn't be home that night. Just then, Miss Wilson walked into the office with 2 small boxes. She put them on the large meeting table and said, "Mr. Williams, these were sent over by President Wright at West Chicago International and Mr. Cook from the Whistler Hotel. They said they're a gift for you." Adriana and Mitch? Kevin put down his phone. What could this be? He wondered. "Yes, sir," Miss Wilson nodded. There was a trace of excitement in her voice. "Thank you, Miss Wilson. Please don't let me keep you from your work," Kevin said gently. She left the office and Kevin opened the box for Mitch. There was a red pill inside. Kevin clearly remembered the pill that Mitch had given him a few days before. Since he took that pill, it seemed his body had gone through some changes. He wanted to find out more about this fiery red pill, so Kevin called Cook. "Mitch, are you busy right now?" "No, I'm not. What's up, my friend?" Cook had a sense of urgency in his voice. Kevin frowned and asked him, "Did you just send me another pill? What's this one supposed to do for me?" He wasn't sure if he wanted to hear what Cook had to say. Kevin opened the box on his desk and looked inside. Inside it was a red pill, similar to the tan one that Cook had given him a while back. He decided to call his friend to find out what this one would do since the last one had disastrous side effects.
"Kevin, didn't I already give you a pill?" Cook slowly said. "Anyway, I found out from the head researcher that the medical properties of the new pill actually enhance the properties of the first one you took. It should help you a lot."
Cook's tedious explanation started to give Kevin a headache. "I have to get back to work. Talk to you later." Kevin hung up the phone and stared at the pill. He clearly remembered how he'd felt after taking the first one. "Do I take it or not?" Kevin pondered. He thought for a while and decided that his friend wouldn't try to hurt him. So he picked up the pill and swallowed it. Within seconds, Kevin felt like his whole body was engulfed in flames. It was like his brain was burning with an indescribable pain. Then Kevin fell to the ground in agony. He closed his eyes and passed out. Half an hour later, when Kevin slowly came to, he couldn't find any change to his body. That was fine with him since the last pill had given him that disgusting, smelly ooze all over him. He thought to himself, "I hope those researchers didn't trick him. I don't really feel any different." Kevin's phone rang and startled him back to reality.
"Hello? Hello, is this Kevin?"
Kevin didn't recognize the charming voice that was speaking to him. "Who's this?" Kevin asked in confusion.
"This is Phoebe Anderson. We met at the Whistler Hotel." She paused for a moment. "At the celebration the family threw after getting the Williams contract."
The event had turned into a real mess because of Jason's behavior, but Kevin hadn't forgotten her. "Oh, of course. I remember you now. What can I do for you?" He was polite, but still had his doubts about what he was getting into. He hadn't spoken with Phoebe since that day. Why would she suddenly call him out of the blue?
"I've been meaning to ask you. At Grandma Jones's birthday party, did you give her an antique tiara?"
She asked with a hint of curiosity. "Yes, why?" Kevin asked in an aloof tone. He did give Grandma Jones a tiara, but before he could present it to her, Bradley had ruined his plan. Kevin ended up angrily taking back the gift and leaving.
"Do you still have the tiara?"
Phoebe asked excitedly. "It's only a trinket. Are you interested in it?" Kevin said teasingly. Phoebe replied in a very serious tone of voice.
"Kevin, the Jones family isn't aware of it, but I peeked in the bag when nobody was looking. I'm sure that it's the legendary golden sunburst tiara."
Kevin slightly raised his eyebrows. He really didn't expect Phoebe to know about this. "So, what would you like to know?" Kevin asked with interest.
"Don't worry, I just want to take a few photos,"
Phoebe said hesitantly. "Okay, I think we can arrange that," Kevin agreed readily.
"Really? If you're free now, you can come to our antique store, Anderson Fine
Phoebe said excitedly. She was afraid that Kevin would refuse. After all, the golden sunburst only existed in legends. There were few written records of it, and she was only aware of it from rare eyewitness accounts. Phoebe had only seen sketches of it, but she had studied them well. An hour later, Kevin arrived at the entrance of the Anderson family store. This was the biggest antique store in all of Chicago, and it contained many priceless treasures. Kevin had heard a lot about the place, but he'd never been there before. Just as he was entering the door, an employee stopped him. "Excuse me, sir, are you on the list?" Kevin glanced at the nameplate on the man's chest. Doug Birch. Then he asked, "What list?" "If you're not aware of the list, then you probably shouldn't be here," Birch said disdainfully. "There are only two ways to get in here. The first is to have a special invitation, and the second is to be an antique dealer. Which one are you?" "I was invited by Phoebe Anderson," Kevin replied calmly. The man took a look at Kevin's clothes and smirked. "Wearing those rags? You can't possibly know President Anderson." Kevin's irritation showed on his face. He didn't expect a staff member to be so rude. "Get lost," Birch said as he pushed Kevin out the door and onto the sidewalk. Kevin didn't strike back, but Birch staggered back and fell to the ground like he'd been hit really hard. "How dare you push me?" he shouted as he got up off the ground. "Security! Robbery!" Two security guards showed up immediately. "Arrest him and take him to the police station," Birch said as he pointed at Kevin. The two security guards looked menacing as they rushed up to Kevin and grabbed his arms. "You'd better cooperate or you'll regret it," one of the guards said coldly. "That's enough," Kevin shouted. This is such an overreaction, he thought. Kevin struggled slightly and the two guards flew 6 feet away, hitting the ground with a thud. Kevin was stunned by this. He looked down at his hands in disbelief. "How did I get so strong?" he thought to himself. "You're in big trouble now," Birch yelled. "What are you talking about? You attacked me first," Kevin pointed out. Birch looked over at the two security guards who were getting up from the sidewalk. "Arrest him." Just then they heard a loud voice. "What are you doing?" Kevin turned around and saw a man walking out of the store. "Sir, you have to help me." Birch quickly ran to the store's manager, Stephen Burrows, and sobbed. "He came here to rob the store. When I tried to stop him, he threw me to the ground." He continued his accusation. "Then he beat up these two guards." Burrows walked up to Kevin. "Sir, do you have a reasonable explanation for this?" He looked threatening but remained polite. "Who do you believe, me or him?" Kevin asked flatly. Burrows frowned, turned around, and said to Birch and the guards, "Please show him off the property." "All right, Mr. Burrows," Birch said with a smile. He stared spitefully at Kevin and said, "So you want to cause trouble? Well, I'll teach you a lesson." A moment later, Birch was lying on the ground, staring up at Kevin. Half of his face immediately swelled up. Kevin had barely touched him. "This is getting annoying," Kevin said unemotionally. "You're a dead man," Birch growled as he rubbed his face. When Burrows saw this, he was very upset. "Do you have a death wish or something?" Burrows had lost patience with Kevin. Kevin decided he'd wasted enough time with these stooges. He took out his phone and called Phoebe. "If you're not down at the front door in 2 minutes, I'm out of here." He didn't give Phoebe a chance to respond. He just hung up the phone. "It's useless to call for help. We're calling the police. But first we're going to beat the crap out of you," Birch shouted as he struggled to get up. He stood next to the manager and glared at Kevin. In fact, Birch and manager Burrows were cousins. Burrows used his influence to get him his job as the head of security. Needless to say, the job and his family connection went to Birch's head. "Mr. Birch, he looks pretty poor. I don't think he can even afford a lawyer," one of the security guards said. "That's right. His clothes look like he got them at the thrift store," the other guard said. "I don't care," Birch responded. Then he turned to look at Burrows. "Cousin, I'll leave it up to you." Burrows took a deep breath and walked over to Kevin. "You've been a lot of trouble today. I think I'll let security spend a little time with you before we send you to the police station." The manager's attitude gave Kevin an uneasy feeling. How would he get out of this without even more trouble? Suddenly, they heard a woman's voice from the entrance. Phoebe practically ran out the door. "Kevin, when did you get here? Why didn't you come inside?" Burroughs and the others immediately snapped to attention when they saw her.
"President Anderson."
Kevin looked Phoebe in the eyes and explained, "President Anderson, your security guards just threatened to beat me up and have me arrested. Are you sure I'm still welcome?"
"What are you talking about? You've misunderstood, sir," Birch said to Kevin.
Phoebe was stunned at first, but when she saw the look on Birch's face, she understood what was going on. "What's this about?" she asked sternly.
"President Anderson, he's the one who barged in and hit me," he replied.
She didn't want to hear another word. "You're fired." "Don't you think you owe me an apology?" Kevin asked Birch.
"Never,"
he replied arrogantly. Kevin turned around and looked at Phoebe. He smiled and said, "Why, President Anderson, I'm surprised that you hired someone like this." When Phoebe heard this, she turned to the man and said, "Yes, I think an apology is in order." Birch was about to argue with her, but he decided it would be easier to just apologize.
"Yes, ma'am."
"Then what are you waiting for? If you want to continue working here, you have to apologize to this gentleman." Phoebe crossed her arms and waited. Burroughs closed his eyes. He knew that his cousin had finally gone too far and had been rude to the wrong person. Even though he was the store manager, he was an Anderson family employee. There was no way he was going to stand up for his cousin. On top of that, he didn't expect Kevin to be so important, especially the way he was dressed. Birch walked meekly over to Kevin and said quietly,
"Sir, I apologize."
Kevin cupped his ear and said, "I'm sorry, I don't think I heard you." Birch took a deep breath and shouted,
"I'm sorry, sir."
"That's better," Kevin said with a slight smile. Then Kevin handed the bag containing the gold sunburst tiara to Phoebe. "Here you go. Go ahead and take all the photos you want." She looked very excited. She immediately grabbed Kevin's elbow and pulled him into the shop. Phoebe led him into the store's photography studio. She set up a camera and placed the tiara on a beautiful backdrop that helped highlight all the details of the piece. Kevin watched her intently. After taking quite a lot of shots, Phoebe turned off the studio lights and put the camera away. She turned to Kevin and said, "Thank you so much." "No problem. If you ever want to see it again, just give me a call, anytime." Kevin slowly put the valuable item back in his bag. Phoebe nodded. Then she hesitated for a moment and said, "Kevin, there's something else I'd like to ask." "Go ahead," Kevin said with a smile. "The legendary golden sunburst has been lost for many years. How did you track it down?" she asked him. Having grown up in a family that was involved in the antique business, Phoebe was well aware of its value. She was very curious how Kevin, who everyone claimed had been freeloading off the Jones family for 3 years, had found such a precious object. "If I told you that this was a family heirloom, would you believe me?" Kevin replied with a smile. A staff member suddenly ran into the room and interrupted them. "President Anderson, we need your help downstairs." Phoebe was surprised by this and replied, "Is it something that you can't handle yourself?" The man's name was Albert Landau. He was a senior antique appraiser who had worked for the Anderson family for more than 10 years. It was extremely unusual for Mr. Landau to have trouble appraising an antique. "This gentleman has brought a string of antique pearls. There's something about their quality that's giving me some trouble arriving at a value. I really can't make a decision," Mr. Landau said somewhat awkwardly. Kevin wondered if he might be able to help. Phoebe had just finished taking photos of Kevin's antique, the golden sunburst tiara. Her senior appraiser rushed into the studio to ask for help with a string of pearls that he was unsure of. "Let's go take a look," Phoebe said to Kevin, and she immediately left the room. Mr. Landau looked at Kevin in surprise. He wasn't sure what to think. How could this young man in tattered clothes be of any help? When they reached the main showroom, Kevin saw a group starting to form around a young man. On the table in front of him was an old mahogany box. "May I ask your name?" Phoebe inquired politely. "My name is Sam McKay. Are you the owner of this shop?" the surprised young man asked her. "Yes, Mr. McKay. May I have a look?" Phoebe said with a smile. He casually handed the box to Phoebe. At the same time, he explained, This is a family heirloom. It never leaves the house, but we're in desperate need of money." Phoebe nodded to show her understanding of his predicament. As she reached to open the box, a few of the local antique shop owners hurried in to see what all the buzz was about. When Phoebe opened it, a string of beautiful golden pearls glistened under the store's lights. They were strung together with what looked like a pure gold clasp. "Pure gold South Sea pearls?" Phoebe asked in surprise. Judging from the luster and craftsmanship, they looked to date from the late 18th century. The antique shop owners who were looking on immediately began to discuss the rare find in hushed tones. "You sure know a lot," a young man commented. Phoebe examined the string of pearls for a few minutes before she looked up and asked, "How much do you want to sell them for?" McKay smiled and said, $50,000. Since you're the owner of this establishment, you also know that they're worth far more than that." Phoebe nodded slightly and stared intently at the pearls. For some reason, she felt that something wasn't quite right. Kevin snorted mockingly when he saw the string of pearls. However, the other onlookers were more impressed. One of them said, "Only 50,000? President Anderson sure has found a bargain." While everyone was discussing the find, another young man walked in. "Excuse me, may I be of assistance?" Mr. Landau quickly walked forward and politely greeted him. "My name is Charles Grant. I'm in town for a business trip. I like to collect antiques, and I heard that Anderson Antiques is quite famous, so I came in to take a look around." He eyed the store and said, "As long as I like what I see, money is no object." Suddenly, the young man's gaze fell on the golden pearls in Phoebe's hands. "Are those actually golden pearls?" Grant said as he quickly walked up to her. "Be careful. Don't damage them. They're worth a lot of money," McKay said nervously. Grant waved him off casually and said, "Don't worry, I'm good for it." The young businessman looked at the pearls for a minute and asked with a smile, "So, how much are you selling them for?" McKay said excitedly, $50,000. "Okay," Grant said as he placed them in the box. "I'll take them." The look on McKay's face said, "Well, lady, you missed your chance." This seemed to bother Phoebe. She said, "Mr. Grant, haven't you ever heard of first come, first served? I was still negotiating with Mr. McKay when you interrupted us." "Well, maybe you shouldn't have taken so long to make up your mind. I'm ready to buy them right now," Grant replied with a smile. "So am I. Mr. McKay, I'll take them." Phoebe immediately agreed to the transaction. Kevin shook his head. What a shame, he thought to himself. A real string of pearls like these would be worth a couple $100,000. "Ma'am, are you trying to snatch these away from me?" He acted indignant. Then he turned around and looked at McKay. "I'll tell you what. I'll give you $75,000 for them." Phoebe was a little unnerved. She said, "Mr. McKay, you came in here today with a valuable item. I just said that we were willing to accept the deal, and now you're considering selling to this man. Don't you have any integrity?" The onlookers all nodded their heads in agreement. Grant's behavior was not the way reputable people did business. One of them said to him, "This isn't a very honest way to handle things. You came in here to deal with President Anderson." They were all on Phoebe's side in this. After all, the family had an excellent reputation in the Chicago region. Why wouldn't they support her? But Grant interrupted and spoke to McKay. "Be realistic. I just offered you 50% more than she was planning to give you." Kevin almost laughed out loud. McKay and Grant were clearly trying to scam them. Couldn't Phoebe tell? Finally, McKay seemed to have made a big decision. He let out a long breath and said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Grant, but they're right. I can't go against my principles. I'm selling them to the young lady." "Then you're the biggest fool in the world," Grant said as he shook his head. He turned to Phoebe and said, "Ma'am, it's your lucky day. These pearls are worth at least $100,000. Phoebe happily took the box. "Let's arrange for Mr. K's payment." Just as Mr. Landau was about to ask the man for his information to prepare the check, Kevin walked up to Phoebe. "President Anderson, if you buy these pearls, you're making a huge mistake," Kevin said with a polite smile. Silence fell on the crowd. What do you mean? McKay glared at Kevin. It's quite simple. They're fake. Also, your acting skills aren't that great either. I'm exhausted from trying not to laugh, Kevin said with a big grin. Phoebe frowned and looked at Kevin. The antique dealers who were still there watching all this started whispering to each other again. Who is this guy? He's actually questioning Miss Anderson's judgment? She's one of the best young antique appraisers in the city, added another. How does this guy dressed in rags know anything? We know it's genuine. McKay was indignant. Who are you? How can you say my family heirloom is a fake? Charles Grant glared at Kevin too. Suddenly, one of the antique store owners pointed at Kevin. Aren't you married to one of the Joneses? What do you know about antiques? Everyone started laughing. Thanks to Jason's gossiping, almost everyone in the city knew about Kevin's relationship with the Jones family. One of the antique dealers said to him, You don't know what you're looking at. In any case, this is Anderson jewelry, not Jones. We don't care what you think. After hearing this, Phoebe looked at Kevin with a puzzled expression. This golden pearl necklace was gorgeous. Why did Kevin say it was fake? Maybe he doesn't know all that much about antiques, she thought. McKay was getting impatient. He turned to Phoebe and said, Ma'am, please make a decision. I came here to make an honest transaction, and now I'm being accused of trying to pass off a fake. Then he turned to Kevin and moaned, If you don't give me an explanation right now, I'll call the police and sue you for slander. Kevin mocked him, saying, Still sticking to your role, huh? You should leave acting to the professionals. Kevin took the wooden box from Phoebe and opened it. Everyone here is in the antique business. You should all know how to rate a pearl. Size, shape, color, luster, and all that. Kevin pulled the pearls out of the box and continued his lesson. You are about to pay a ridiculous price for pearls that are of the lowest grade. Sure, the size of these pearls is impressive. However, they've been treated to improve their color and luster. Even the clasp is cheap. Kevin held the string up for everyone to see. A large, perfect pearl should roll like a marble. These pearls are perfect, McKay argued. Kevin stared right in the man's eyes, took one of the pearls between his fingers, and pinched it hard. It turned into powder before their eyes. How dare you destroy my family's most precious treasure? McKay whined. Grant was beginning to regret the whole scheme. Now how am I supposed to pay my mother's hospital bills? McKay sobbed. Kevin applauded and said, There, that's a little better. Your acting is improving. McKay kept trying and said to Phoebe, This is outrageous. The pearls are worth at least $200,000. I demand that this man compensate me for my loss. Phoebe couldn't believe her ears. She looked at Kevin and realized he actually did know what he was talking about. Kevin spoke to the antique dealers who had come over to watch and said to them, You really ought to get your eyes checked. I can't believe you're in the antique business. They were indignant. What right do you have to say that about us? Grandma Jones will hear about this. Quiet, Phoebe shouted angrily. Everyone quieted down. Kevin, please continue, Phoebe said politely. Kevin looked at McKay and said, You should at least put some effort into your counterfeits. Has anybody fallen for this cheap crap? When Kevin finished talking, he threw the whole string of pearls onto the floor in disgust. They were all stunned, especially the two dealers who had been doubting Kevin. But it wasn't really their fault. The pearls that McKay claimed to have were extremely rare and valuable. They probably had never seen real ones in their entire lives. I demand proof, otherwise I'm calling the police, McKay continued. Wow, you really are stubborn. Kevin turned around and looked at Phoebe and said, I'm sure you have some modern equipment in your lab. Go ahead and check them out. I'm sure that they're cheap grade A pearls, maybe even beads of glass or plastic, that have been chemically treated to fool the eye. Phoebe handed them to Mr. Landau and said, Go and examine them, quickly. Yes, Madam President, right away. Mr. Landau quickly picked up the string of pearls and headed back to the lab. How do I know you won't switch them with fakes? McKay shouted loudly. Don't worry, we would never do such a despicable thing, Phoebe answered sharply. She was no longer excited, but she definitely felt lucky. If Kevin hadn't been there, her reputation might have been tarnished. Mr. Landau returned quickly and whispered something in Phoebe's ear. She looked at the printout that Mr. Landau had handed her, and you could tell right away she wasn't pleased. McKay turned pale. His partner Grant was about to say something, but knew that the evidence was against them. "Call the police," Phoebe said to the security guards. "Run!" McKay shouted as he sprinted for the door. Kevin had just exposed the conman who was trying to sell a fake gold and pearl necklace to Phoebe. He was able to stop him from running out by throwing a box at his leg, knocking him to the ground. Phoebe ordered her guards, "Call the police and have him taken to the police station." Everyone immediately surrounded McKay. Grant pointed an accusatory finger at him and yelled, "You're selling fakes? I can't believe I almost fell for it." However, as he turned around to leave, Kevin had already blocked his path. "What's with you? The thief is over there. Why are you stopping me?" Grant complained. This made everyone turn around. "Why are you in such a hurry to leave? Aren't you going to take your partner along?" Kevin said with a sneer. "I assure you I'm a legitimate businessman," Grant said in a haughty voice as he tried to go around Kevin and head for the door. But Kevin suddenly grabbed Grant's wrist. "Your acting skills aren't that great either," Kevin said to him. "Can't you see that I'm a victim too?" Grant pleaded. He struggled hard but found that Kevin's hand was like a steel clamp, tightly gripping his wrist. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't break free. They all heard sirens in the street and looked out the front window. Kevin had just sent an urgent text message to Officer Emmett. The police lieutenant walked directly to Kevin and asked, "Where are the suspects?" "One is here and the other is over there," Kevin pointed at McKay and Grant. "Officer, don't listen to him. I just came in here to shop for antiques. If he tells you anything else, he's a liar," Grant said. The antique dealers from the neighboring shops pulled McKay over to Emmett. One of them said, "Officer, Mr. Grant is telling the truth. We're all witnesses." He paused and continued, "He's framing Mr. Grant to make himself look good and impress President Anderson." Kevin couldn't believe how misguided these men were. How could they have fallen for this nonsense? Officer Emmett looked disappointed. She turned to look at Phoebe, who was standing next to her. "Miss Anderson, do you think this person is involved in the crime?" Phoebe didn't know what to say, so she just shook her head. Emmett sighed a little and turned to look back at Kevin. She informed him, "Since none of the witnesses say that he was involved, I have no choice but to let him go." Kevin couldn't believe that someone with Officer Emmett's experience couldn't see through the deception. He was about to give up and let go of Grant's arm when he noticed that there seemed to be something wrong with the man's face. He reached out and pulled on Grant's skin. Everyone was shocked to see him standing there, holding the man's face in his hand. Well, it was actually a mask, and the nasty face that underneath was pretty frightening. "So it's you!" Emmett exclaimed as she tightly grabbed onto Grant's collar. Kevin looked at her in surprise. "You know him?" Emmett nodded and explained. "Half a year ago, a rich Chicago art collector was swindled out of a painting worth about $250,000. We've been following leads ever since, but couldn't find a trace of suspects." "It was them?" Kevin asked her. "Yes, it's them." Emmett nodded again. "They have a unique approach, using various disguises to trick their victims." A few backup officers entered the store to help, and Emmett ordered them to pull the mask from McKay's face. It was made of very realistic artificial skin, very convincing to say the least. "Kevin, thank you for helping us catch these two criminals. You've made a great contribution," Officer Emmett said happily. Kevin smiled and shrugged his shoulders. Then he glanced at the owners of the antique shops. The ones who had been speaking in Grant's defense were especially embarrassed. They were staring at Kevin in surprise. The masks on Grant and McKay's faces were so realistic that nobody noticed anything unusual. But how did Kevin see through the deception? As the prisoners were being escorted to the squad cars, Officer Emmett suddenly asked Kevin, "I'm very curious. How did you see that they were wearing masks?" "To tell you the truth, it was Grant's fault. When he struggled, the edge of his mask curled up. Pretty careless of him," Kevin said casually. Officer Emmett had some doubts about his explanation. Grant had disguised himself incredibly well. The mask and his entire face were really convincing, but Kevin could actually see the tiny gap in the slightly raised corner at a glance. "When did my eyesight get so good?" Kevin thought to himself. "In any case, I owe you my thanks. When I have the time, I'll treat you to dinner." After Officer Emmett said this, she headed out to her squad car and drove away. The owners of the neighborhood antique shops also left. Phoebe slowly walked up to Kevin and said a very sincere, "Thank you." "No need to thank me. It was my pleasure," Kevin said with a smile. When Phoebe heard him say this, a faint smile appeared on her face. "By the way, I could tell from your discussion of the pearls that you know a lot about the subject. Have you had any formal training in antique appraisal?" Kevin thought for a second and said, "I used to know an old gentleman who taught me a lot about antiques." What Kevin didn't expect was that Phoebe would suddenly become so excited to hear this. She asked him, "Are you still in touch with him? Do you know his name and address?" Phoebe gave Kevin a hopeful look. She wondered how he had been able to see through the deception at a single glance. He obviously knew things that she didn't. Phoebe figured that his teacher must be even more knowledgeable. "I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I haven't seen him in a very long time. I have no idea where he is," Kevin said apologetically. Phoebe let out a disappointed sigh. She hesitated for a moment before saying, "Kevin, can I ask you for a favor?" "Just name it, Phoebe. As long as it's something I can help with, I'll do my best," Kevin said straightforwardly. "I want to invite you to be the chief antique appraiser for Anderson Fine Jewelry and Antiques," she said. Phoebe seemed to be afraid that Kevin would refuse, so she quickly added, "You don't have to come to work every day, but if I need your help, I'll expect you to come in. I can give you a salary of $150,000 a year for your effort. Would that be okay?" Phoebe was nervous because she didn't know if he'd be interested, but at the moment, Kevin was the most insightful expert she knew. Mr. Landau, who was standing nearby, gasped when he heard this. He had worked for the Andersons for over 10 years, but he barely made a third of that salary. If Kevin was only going to be a part-time consultant, why would his salary be so high? On the other hand, Mr. Landau had witnessed Kevin's profound knowledge and insight, so he couldn't disagree with the decision to hire him. He was envious of Kevin's offer, but felt that he deserved his good fortune. "Let me get this straight. I don't need to come into work every day and I'll earn $150,000 a year. Why would I say no to that offer?" Kevin agreed right away. He felt that it was getting late, so he said goodbye to Phoebe and headed back to the office, carrying the tiara in his bag. That night, Kevin went home to his new apartment. He sent a message to Lily, showered, and went to bed. The next morning, as soon as Kevin arrived at his office, Miss Wilson came in to give him a report on the company's activities. "Mr. Williams, today is the premiere of Brittany Davis's show, the one that the Jones family took the lead on. Do you want to attend?" she asked him. "I won't be able to attend. If I go, it may affect Brittany's performance. If you can set up the live feed, I'll just watch it here at my desk," Kevin explained. He was well aware that Brittany's deal had been set up by the Jones family. Moreover, Lily was personally responsible for it. If he appeared in front of his wife, his true identity would certainly be exposed. "I understand, sir," Miss Wilson replied. Then she left to make the arrangements for him. A while later, the live feed was set up on his computer and Kevin watched Brittany slowly walk on the stage. He noticed that you could hear a lot of noise from the audience, which made it hard to appreciate Brittany's performance. Then, when Brittany was halfway through her song, there was a problem with her microphone. The crowd began to boo. As the sound engineers were trying to fix it, Brittany stomped her feet angrily and turned around to go backstage. Kevin slammed his fist on his desk and called Miss Wilson in. "What's going on over there?" he asked her. "I have no idea, sir. I'll go find out right away," Miss Wilson replied. Then she left the room and went to her desk to make a call. Kevin looked in astonishment at the dent that he just made in his desk with his fist. He stared at the deep indentation and wondered, how did I get so damn strong? Just then, Miss Wilson hung up her phone. Kevin grabbed a few documents and used them to cover his desk so that she wouldn't see what he'd done. "Sir, I have an update on the show. There are 4 engineers in charge of Brittany's sound equipment backstage. Unfortunately, they've all made a mess of the production," Miss Wilson explained. When Kevin heard this, he understood immediately and said, "Please call them to my office." "Right away, sir." Miss Wilson also had some suspicions, so she was glad that Kevin had made this request. After she left, Kevin immediately picked up his phone and called Mitchell Cook. "Hi, Mitch. I'm in my office at the Williams building. I need some help with a few things. You think you can come downtown?" A little over a half an hour later, the 4 staff members who had screwed up Brittany's show entered the CEO's office and saw Mitchell Cook sitting in Kevin's office chair smoking a cigar. There were several men in black suits and sunglasses on either side of him. Kevin could have easily gotten the 4 of them to talk, but he didn't want to expose his identity.
"So, I understand you're all sound engineers. Were you just working backstage at Brittany's show?" Well, what I'd like to understand is what the hell happened to our star performer's microphone? Cook asked sternly as he blew a smoke ring toward the ceiling. Kevin, who was standing with Cook's bodyguard, shook his head when he saw the four of them. Cat's got your tongue? Do you know who I am? He asked with a sneer. I'm Mitchell Cook. If you dare lie to me, I guarantee there will be consequences. When they heard his name, the four unlucky sound engineers were quaking in their boots. Everyone knew about Cook's reputation throughout Chicago. After about a minute of this staring contest, one of them couldn't take the pressure and he stammered, As long as you don't hurt me, I'll tell you whatever you want to know. The other three men looked at each other and started to cooperate too. A few minutes later, Cook ended the impromptu meeting and waved them out of the room. Then Cook stood up and smiled, saying, Kevin, everything is clear to me now. Why, that's amazing, Mr. Cook. I didn't realize you were so well known around here, Kevin teased. No need to thank me, Kevin. If it wasn't for your help, I wouldn't be so successful right now. After saying this, Cook said with a hint of curiosity in his voice, Kevin, there's one thing I don't understand. Now that you're the head of Williams Media, why are you still staying in the Jones family? I have my reasons, Mitch. Let's drop the subject for now, Kevin answered. After a few more minutes of small talk, Kevin asked Miss Wilson to walk Cook back to the elevator. Then he let her know that if Williams Media needed any hotels in the future, they should put the Whistler Hotel at the top of the list. After Cook left, Kevin's phone rang. Dorothy's voice blared in Kevin's earpiece. You're a real piece of work. You haven't been home in days. Do you have any idea what just happened? Hurry up and meet us at the Jones mansion. Actually, Dorothy didn't want to see Kevin. It was Grandma Jones who had ordered everyone in the Jones family to come right away. She was furious. All right, I'll be right there, Kevin responded. Then he hung up the phone and rushed over to the Jones mansion. Of course, he knew what this call was about. While waiting at a stoplight, Kevin called Brittany. At that very moment, Brittany was in her room crying about the disaster at her show. There were tears flowing down her face, and she was heartbroken. When she saw that Kevin was calling, Brittany answered very politely and nervously. Mr. Williams, I'm sorry. I just don't know how this happened. The botched show had ruined her image, erasing all of her previous success, and the company suffered an enormous loss. So Brittany assumed that Kevin was calling to chew her out. No need to apologize. I've already sent someone to investigate this matter. This has nothing to do with you. It looks like it's an internal problem in the Jones family, Kevin said with a sigh. Oh, Mr. Williams, is this true? Brittany asked in surprise. Don't ask any more questions right now. Miss Wilson will send you an email later and I'll need you to do exactly as I say, Kevin instructed her. When Kevin hung up the phone, he'd just arrived at the Jones mansion. As he walked in the room, Kevin saw that the entire Jones family was standing in the main reception room. Grandma Jones, who was sitting on a chair, had a gloomy expression on her face. Since the Jones family was in charge of the project, they assumed that Williams Media would blame them for a disastrous show. When they saw Kevin walk in, they all looked displeased. They didn't know why she'd asked him to come to their meeting. What use could he be? Had he just come to poke fun at them? Suddenly, Jason stood up and pointed at Lily. He sneered and said, Lily, it wasn't easy for our family to set up the deal with Williams Media. You screwed everything up, so now it's up to you to tell Grandma how to fix it. I'm sorry, Grandma, Lily said sadly. Without waiting for Grandma Jones to reply, Jason interrupted and said, What's the use of being sorry? Are you just looking for Grandma's pity? Whether you're sorry or not, Williams Media is going to blame us for your blunder. Then Jason turned his head to look at Grandma Jones and continued, Grandma, I think Lily did a terrible job. In order to keep something like this from happening again, I suggest you pull her out of all her duties in the company. That way, she won't be able to interfere in our business anymore. We can't let Williams Media hold us responsible for her incompetence. One of the younger members of the family said, That's right, Grandma. What Jason said makes sense. Another one commented, Lily really blew it. I think this would be a good way to punish her for her failure. Everyone around him nodded in approval. Grandma Jones looked around the room and then looked at Lily. She coldly said, Then it's agreed. From this moment on, you will have no say in the company's affairs. When Lily heard this, her face instantly turned pale. She wanted to explain but just couldn't find the words. Kevin had been watching all of this from the sidelines. What could he do to help without revealing his true identity to Lily? Just as Grandma Jones finished speaking, Kevin stepped forward and declared loudly, I disagree. Everyone in the room burst into laughter. Did I hear that right? He actually disagreed? They were asking each other.
One of the older members of the Jones family said,
"Just because you know the owner of the Whistler Hotel and the president of West Chicago International, don't let it go to your head."
One of Lily's aunts agreed. "That's right. Since when do you have a voice in our private business?" They all looked at Kevin like he was a bonehead. "What did you just say?" Grandma Jones asked sternly. "I said I object," Kevin sneered and added. "As for the problems with Brittany's show, you should investigate what really happened before listening to Jason's nonsense and putting all of the blame on my wife." "So, do you believe we're being unfair to Lily?" Grandma Jones asked. "After you look into it, you'll find out what a huge mistake you've made," Kevin replied calmly. Just as Grandma Jones was about to say something, Jason interrupted.
"Kevin, you really have some nerve. Take a look around. None of us want to hear what you have to say," Jason said disdainfully.
"I just want Grandma to investigate this matter further. Why would that bother you?" Kevin looked Jason in the eyes and asked him, "Does this have something to do with you?" A strange look flashed across Jason's eyes and he sneered.
"What right do you have to question my involvement?"
"Then how can you be so sure that this must be my wife's responsibility?" Kevin noticed something in Jason's reaction and he asked him seriously, "Could it be that this whole mess really is your fault?" Jason looked at Kevin awkwardly. Just as he was about to attack Kevin physically, he remembered what had happened at Grandma Jones's birthday party and he lost his nerve. Kevin took advantage of Jason's hesitation and said, "I don't care who caused all the trouble behind the scenes at Brittany's show. All I know is my wife is innocent." Kevin's intent was obvious and they all knew what he meant. However, nobody was willing to agree without some solid evidence.
"I think you're deliberately looking to start trouble. Don't talk nonsense,"
Jason shot back as he clenched his fists.
"Remember, you're not a true member of the Jones family and you have no say here."
"I didn't say you did it, Jason. Why are you getting so worked up?" Kevin replied as he looked deep into his eyes. Suddenly, Grandma Jones slapped the table hard. She had been very unhappy to see Kevin show up for the meeting, but because of his close ties to Cook and President Wright, she didn't say anything. But he was causing a lot of trouble for her favorite grandson in front of the entire family. She couldn't take any more of it. "Kevin, if you plan to say another word about this, you can get the hell out of here right now," Grandma Jones said callously. Seeing Grandma getting so angry, most of the Joneses were curious to see how this would play out. Lily, who looked very worried, walked over to Kevin and tugged on his sleeve. "Grandma's getting upset. Please stop, Kevin. This isn't getting us anywhere." Dorothy walked up to them and said, "Kevin, you're only causing trouble. What gives you the right to open your big mouth here?" First, Kevin looked at Dorothy, who was obviously irate. Then he looked at the rest of the Jones family surrounding him. Finally, his gaze stopped on Lily. Taking a deep breath, Kevin patted Lily's shoulder and calmly stepped aside. "Okay, everyone, get back to work," Grandma Jones ordered. Then she said, "Jason, go and discuss this with Williams Media. Try to minimize the impact on our company."
"Okay, Grandma,"
Jason replied as he gave Lily a scornful look. Just as the Joneses were about to leave, they heard a charming voice from the mansion's foyer. "May I ask if Grandma Jones is here?" Everyone looked over and saw a beautiful woman slowly walking into the room. Grandma Jones recognized Brittany at a glance and her face fell. She subconsciously believed that Brittany was there to accuse them. But she forced a smile and asked, "Why, Brittany, what brings you here today? You should have let us know you were coming, so we could have prepared a proper welcome for you." "Why, thank you, Grandma Jones," Brittany replied with a polite nod. "Please have a seat," Grandma Jones offered with a smile. "I'm sorry, but I prefer to remain standing," Brittany said graciously. She had already seen Kevin standing in the crowd and felt a little uneasy about the situation. Grandma Jones spoke to her in a serene voice. "Miss Davis, please don't be angry. The problems at the show were all our fault and it will cost us dearly.
Rest assured that I've already taught Lily a lesson. She's been pulled from all our company projects." When Brittany heard this, she turned to look at Lily. Lily could barely make eye contact. Even though she knew she was innocent, she was starting to believe that everything was her fault. As everyone watched, Brittany slowly walked over to her. "Please don't blame yourself, Lily. I've already looked into this, and it isn't your fault at all." Everyone was stunned to hear this. Some of them immediately remembered what Kevin had said. They couldn't help but look over at Jason. "Brittany, are you sure?" Lily asked in disbelief. "Yes, Lily, it's the truth," Brittany reassured her. Grandma Jones was also a little stunned and asked her, "Miss Davis, can you be more specific about what happened?" Brittany slowly turned around and looked directly at Jason, who was standing off to the side. When Jason met Brittany's gaze, he got a strange feeling in the pit of his stomach. He wondered, could she have found out that I'm responsible for all of this? Just as Jason was trying to figure out what to do, Brittany turned and shouted towards the door. "You guys can come in now. Tell Grandma Jones everything that happened. We have to clear Lily's name." They all saw the 4 Williams Media sound engineers walk in slowly, looking incredibly guilty. Jason was frantic, but he forced himself to look calm. "Why haven't you told Grandma Jones about any of this?" Brittany snapped. One of the Williams employees pointed right at Jason and shouted, "It's him! It was Jason Jones who ordered us to do it." The second one added, "That's right. He gave us $75,000 each to sabotage Brittany's microphone." The third employee finally spoke up and said, "Mr. Jones also said that he would give us each another $75,000 after it was done." The last one was too afraid to speak, but instead just stared at Jason and nodded in agreement. The entire Jones family was now glaring at Jason. Because Brittany was there, he tried not to curse. "Stop slandering me, you bastards! I've never seen any of you guys before," Jason screamed hysterically. "Don't you know who I am? Do you know what the consequences will be for trying to frame me like this?" Grandma Jones turned to look at Brittany and asked her gently, "Are you sure what they've said is true? This is a very serious matter, and I can't let my grandson be wrongly accused." Kevin shook his head in disbelief. He really didn't understand what Grandma Jones was thinking. How come she refused to believe Brittany and these 4 men? "We're telling the truth," the 4th employee blurted out. "I still have a record of the bank transfer. I haven't moved a single cent of the money he gave me." As he spoke, one of his partners took out his phone and shouted, "I've got proof too." "Don't try to put all the blame on us," said another one as he also pulled out his phone. They knew what kind of man Jason was. However, they decided they'd rather face Jason's wrath than have to explain themselves to Mitchell Cook. Jason was furious. He stared at them as they stood there holding out their phones. "Jason, are you really responsible for all this?" Grandma Jones looked very upset. Jason didn't know what to say to her. Suddenly, Kevin nudged Lily's shoulder and asked her mischievously, "How are you doing? You feel any better now?" "Shut up," Lily scowled, but she was definitely relieved. After a while, Grandma Jones took a deep breath and looked at Brittany awkwardly. "You'll have to forgive Jason. He's young and foolish. If you want to blame someone, blame me for not teaching him better." Even though the evidence was right in front of her eyes, Grandma Jones was still defending Jason out of love for her grandson. "I understand, Grandma Jones. It's all right," she replied. "I just came here to make sure that Lily wouldn't be wrongly accused." But Brittany still had a sad look in her eyes. Grandma Jones seemed to understand what she meant. Then she turned to look at her favorite grandson. "I'm disappointed in you, Jason. I've obviously been too easy on you. How could you do such a terrible thing? As of right now, I forbid you to be involved in our family business, and I also forbid you to leave the property for 1 year. If you do, there will be serious consequences." On the outside, Jason was incredibly arrogant, but he could never argue with Grandma. He bit his tongue and answered, "Yes, Grandma." Grandma Jones turned to look at Brittany again. "Are you satisfied now?" Brittany took a moment to answer. After she saw Kevin lightly nod his head, she said, "It looks like you have the situation under control. But then she got a serious look on her face and added, "That's all in the past now, but I do have a request." "Please tell me what you have on your mind," Grandma Jones said without thinking. As far as Grandma was concerned, as long as Brittany didn't pursue this matter any further, the family wouldn't suffer, and neither would Jason. Brittany's eyes swept across the room, and she looked at them one by one before she slowly said, "In order to prevent this kind of thing from happening again, Lily will be my contact for any further projects. I don't want to work with anyone else." "What do you mean by this?" Grandma Jones asked in confusion. "Because Lily is the only one that I trust." Brittany didn't even look at Grandma Jones. "Do you agree?" "You have my word," Grandma replied. Even if she didn't like the idea, all she could do at this point was smile and agree. Everybody in the room was jealous of Lily, and even though Brittany's image had taken a hit, she still had the full support of Williams Media and was sure to make a comeback. As long as they were behind her, they would definitely make Brittany famous again, and Lily would have lots of opportunities to earn money on future projects. Just when everyone thought that Brittany had finished, she walked up to Kevin and asked him, "Mr. Williams, what do you think of my solution?" "Very good," Kevin said awkwardly. He didn't expect Brittany to do this. His response made Brittany smile. Then she announced to everyone, "As long as Mr. Williams is satisfied, I guess I can head home." She turned around and slowly walked out of the Jones mansion to her car. Everybody started to whisper to each other. What did I just see? Did Brittany actually ask Kevin for his approval? Grandma Jones almost fell off of her chair. She looked at Kevin in disbelief. "That's funny. Maybe you should get someone to look into this further," Kevin said mockingly. Lily pulled on Kevin's arms and pleaded with him. "Please stop." She didn't want to risk upsetting her family further, especially Grandma Jones. But Kevin had other things on his mind. After bringing in the sound engineers who had sabotaged her premiere, Brittany made Grandma Jones promise that only Lily would work with her from now on. And Grandma gave Jason what she thought was a suitable punishment: house arrest. Before he left, Kevin told the Jones family, "Maybe you should get someone to look into this further." The sarcasm in his voice wasn't lost on them, and it showed on their faces. With Grandma Jones giving him a very dirty look, Kevin slowly walked out of the mansion. Lily trotted out of the front door right behind him and said, "Kevin, wait a second." "What's the matter, my love?" Kevin asked with a smile. Lily blushed a little when Kevin called her that. She gathered herself and asked, "Kevin, tell me honestly, did you already know the truth before you came here? And how do you know Brittany? Why did she call you Mr. Williams?" After hearing Lily's last question, Kevin raised an eyebrow. With a mischievous smile, he replied, "Don't tell me you're jealous." "No, I'm not. Please tell me the truth." Lily didn't know why, but she couldn't look directly into Kevin's eyes. Kevin smiled, shook his head, and said gently, "That's enough. I won't tease you anymore. To tell you the truth, Brittany and I went to school together." "If you were classmates, then why did she call you Mr. Williams? And why did she come over and ask if you were okay with her decision?" Lily searched Kevin's eyes, hoping to see the truth. "I have no idea. Maybe it's because I'm so charming," Kevin answered with a shrug. However, before Lily could press the issue any further, Kevin's phone suddenly rang. Without looking at the caller ID, Kevin said right away, "It must be my boss looking for me. I have to head to work. Take care of yourself." Kevin didn't give Lily a chance to ask any more questions. He just turned around and left. Kevin walked pretty far from the Jones mansion before he took out his phone again. He saw that it was Phoebe calling. Slightly confused, Kevin dialed her number. "Hello, Miss Anderson. Sorry about the delay getting back to you. Is there anything I can help with?" "Kevin, I really need your help. Do you have the time?" Phoebe sounded anxious. "I think I can pull myself away from work. Where are you?" Kevin asked straightforwardly. "I'm at the store. I'll be waiting for you at the door when you get here," Phoebe replied. She wanted to make sure Kevin got a better welcome than last time. After hanging up, Kevin waved down a taxi and got to Anderson Antiques in half an hour. As he paid the fare, he felt something in the pit of his stomach. What was it? He wondered. As soon as Phoebe saw Kevin, she immediately grabbed him by the arm and ushered him through the front door. As they walked toward the middle of the room, they could hear at least 10 of the local antique shop owners arguing loudly.
"This is definitely fake."
Then another one said,
"I'd bet everything I own. This painting is definitely authentic."
Then a third one responded, "You don't know what you're talking about. Just look at the frame. There's no way this is genuine." Kevin squeezed through the crowd and saw a man watching all of this with a distraught look on his face. It was Phoebe's father, Truman Anderson. He was examining a landscape painting very attentively. "Uncle Truman, you've been looking at that painting for so long now. What's your opinion?" When Kevin heard the pleasant voice, he looked around and saw a familiar face, Matilda Jones. "Kevin, what are you doing here?" Matilda asked curiously. Before Kevin could say anything, Phoebe turned to Truman and asked, "Dad, what do you think? Do you want me to ask another appraiser to take a look?" Truman knew more about art history than almost anyone in Chicago. If even he couldn't identify it, how could anyone else do better? Just then, the man who was trying to sell them the painting asked nervously,
"Mr. Anderson, can't you see that this is an authentic landscape? We need a decision right away."
"Please, don't be impatient," Truman replied. "This certainly looks like a 17th century Dutch landscape. However, I'm not familiar with the artist, so it's difficult to come to a conclusion. The material looks authentic, and I can even see the proper copper and iron pigments," he continued and then paused. "My instincts tells me that this is from the Dutch Golden Age, but I don't recognize the artist. I just can't say it with certainty. Something's not right."
"So you're saying that my painting's a forgery?" the man said angrily.
"I think it might be," Truman replied. He just couldn't give a definite appraisal. The other experts in the room mumbled in agreement.
"Mr. Anderson must know what he's talking about."
While they were all discussing the painting, Kevin slowly walked up and asked, "May I take a look?" One of them spoke up and rudely asked Kevin, "What are you doing? Do you think you know more than one of Chicago's leading experts? You're just going to make a fool of yourself." Matilda heard all these men scoffing at Kevin and looked over to see his reaction. She didn't know him well, but what she did know was that at Grandma Jones's birthday party, he had been able to appraise an 18th century brooch at a glance. He had definitely made an impression on her. But this was different. Even Mr. Anderson thought that the painting was probably a fake. If Kevin made a fool of himself, she might open herself up to ridicule too, especially by her family. Truman looked at Kevin in surprise and then asked, "Aren't you Dorothy Jones's son-in-law?" Phoebe interrupted awkwardly. "Dad, this is the antique appraiser that I brought in as a consultant." When the onlookers heard this, they all started laughing.
"Miss Anderson actually hired this moron as a consultant?"
One of them jeered. Truman looked at his daughter and let out a slow sigh. He'd never seen Kevin before, but he had heard a lot of rumors about him. It was the usual gossip that Jason had been spreading around amongst the members of the Jones family. According to them, Kevin was useless, and they all hoped that he and Lily would get a divorce as soon as possible. But he trusted his daughter. After all, she had been doing a fantastic job with the store. If she had thought that he had something to contribute, Truman was willing to listen. "Please be careful. If it turns out to be a forgery, we don't want to owe this man anything for damages," Truman said. "Don't worry, sir," Kevin replied as he started to study the painting. The atmosphere in the room changed. Everyone watched patiently to see if Kevin would make a fool of himself. Some of them were wondering if Phoebe was still too young to be in such a prominent position in the company. Phoebe started to get nervous. Although she was very confident in Kevin, she wondered if he was making a mistake. After all, her father had just given his own opinion. After only half a minute, Kevin's eyes flashed and he stood up straight with an astonished look on his face. The mumbling and comments from the onlookers started up again. They were all wondering how he could have come to a decision so quickly. But Kevin didn't pay attention to them. He turned around and looked at Phoebe and asked, "How much does he want for it?" Before she had a chance to reply, the man said hurriedly, "200,000. "That sounds about right," Kevin nodded slightly. The rudest of the onlookers said loudly, "Who does he think he is? It's not worth $50. Mr. Anderson already said it was a fake." Matilda was disappointed to see this. Truman let out another sigh and looked at his daughter glumly.
So, this is your expert?
If there hadn't been so many people around, he would have scolded his daughter. She was actually paying this guy $150,000 a year? Sure, they could afford it, but he still didn't like to waste money. When Phoebe heard this, she felt awful. How could Kevin have come to a decision so quickly? Did he really know anything? She was starting to have her doubts. Truman looked directly at Kevin and asked him bluntly, "Can you tell me why this thing is worth $200,000? Kevin knew that the painting was worth 10 times that amount, but he hesitated to say it out loud. Instead, he asked Truman, "Have you ever heard of someone named Vermeer?" Truman was stunned by this question. He answered with a hint of indignation in his voice.
Of course I have. One of the finest Dutch masters. But he only painted 2 landscapes in his lifetime. What you're suggesting is impossible. How could this possibly be a Vermeer? Truman asked him.
The antique dealers surrounding them all had very puzzled expressions, not knowing what the two of them were talking about. Kevin explained, "Look closely at the style, the artist's use of light and shadow. There's a distinctive depth to this piece, and the pigments match Vermeer's preferences too. You can't help but feel some emotion as you look at this landscape."
"But he hardly ever painted landscapes,"
Truman responded excitedly. Kevin interrupted him and appealed to his experience. "Mr. Anderson, take another look, and I'm sure you'll agree. This is a lost Vermeer landscape. I'm certain of it." Truman looked at Kevin in surprise. If this young man was right, this was an extraordinary discovery. After hesitating for a moment, he went back to the painting and took another look. This time, he pulled a magnifying glass out of his suit pocket. Less than a minute later, Truman practically jumped up and down. He shouted,
"Mr. Landau, please arrange for this gentleman's payment."
The antique dealers who had been watching this spectacle with great interest couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. But seeing Mr. Anderson's excited reaction, they felt very awkward that they had been so rude to Kevin. Matilda looked at Kevin in disbelief. She thought to herself, how could he have identified this painting so easily? Phoebe wasn't quite sure what to think. She asked her father, "Dad, are you sure?"
"Of course I'm sure. Hurry up before the seller changes his mind," he whispered hurriedly in her ear.
The man seemed to be anxious to complete the sale and leave.
"Fine, then go ahead and pay me. I still have other things to do today, and I've already wasted a lot of time here."
Kevin laughed to himself. The man had no idea what he was giving up for only $200,000. He obviously knew nothing about art, just some guy making a quick buck. So how did someone like that get hold of such a valuable piece of art? Kevin really wanted to find out. Truman Anderson, Phoebe's father, was ecstatic. Kevin had correctly identified a lost Vermeer landscape, and the store was sure to see an enormous profit from the deal. Kevin was pleased to have helped, but then he suddenly noticed a few traces of dirt on the painting. Then he recalled that when he bent down to look at the painting, there was a slight moldy scent. Could this painting have been buried somewhere? Kevin thought to himself. Truman was so happy about this find that he hugged Phoebe and said, "Please make sure this gentleman is paid immediately." Then he turned and walked up the stairs to the second floor. While this was going on, most of the local antique shop owners who had watched the whole scene took out their phones and started looking up the Dutch masters on the internet. When they saw how much the painting was actually worth, they were filled with envy. The seller happily accepted the payment and walked out of the store whistling. After a little while, Truman returned to the showroom. He walked up to Kevin and put a card into his hand.
"Kevin, I didn't expect you to be so gifted and discerning. I'm really grateful to you. Please accept this token of my appreciation."
"That's very kind of you, Mr. Anderson, but after all, I am one of your employees," Kevin replied with a smile. Of course, he gladly accepted Truman's gift. This bonus was probably nothing compared to the profit that the store could make on the painting.
"Phoebe was right about you," Truman said sincerely. "You may be young, but you're an excellent appraiser. Let's have a drink later. My treat."
Truman was obviously excited about his newest acquisition. Seeing Kevin's potential, he thought it would be nice to have a talk with him. "Thank you for the kind offer. Unfortunately, I have some things to take care of today. I'll have to take a rain check. We'll get together soon, and it can be my treat," Kevin said while giving him a warm handshake. "All right then, I won't keep you," Truman replied gratefully. "Let's get together soon." Then Kevin headed out the door. Phoebe, Matilda, and the others were surprised to see Kevin leave in such a hurry. Why would he pass up this opportunity to make friends with the company's owner? Kevin wasn't worried about that right now. As soon as he stepped out of the door, he spotted the man who had just sold the painting. "There's something wrong with this guy. I'm sure he dug that priceless painting up somewhere," Kevin thought to himself. Then he tailed him to see where he could be heading. After 2 hours of this, he saw the man go below street level to Wacker Drive, the road that runs under part of downtown Chicago. It's mainly for through traffic and deliveries to keep congestion off the surface streets. Otherwise, things would be an even bigger mess at rush hour. There wasn't much room to walk, but Kevin watched the guy go up to a few men near a loading dock. This was in a part of the underground street that was off the beaten path. Not many prying eyes, except for his. He could hear one of them talk. "Greg, what took you so long? Did you sell that thing?" "I wasted a lot of time in that shop," he said as he pulled out his bank card. "I sold the painting for $200,000, easy money." The one who seemed to be in charge asked him, "Was it worth that much?" "I guess so," Greg answered. "Not bad for a day's work, eh, Johnny?" The other man asked, "Should we head down to the south side again tonight and see what else we can dig up?" Greg was interested in trying again. "Yeah, Max, good idea. Last night we only dug out one painting and got $200,000 for it. Maybe we can find some more good stuff." Kevin, who was hiding in the shadows, heard everything they were saying. He couldn't believe it. Could they be grave robbers? Did anyone still do that? Just then, the head grave robber suddenly looked over to where he was hiding. "Who's over there? Why don't you come a little closer?" Could they have seen me? Kevin wondered. Just as he was about to escape, he heard a woman's voice. "You guys are really bold. Robbing tombs? Aren't you superstitious?" The woman walked out from behind a container less than 10 yards away from Kevin, on the other side of the loading dock. Kevin was stunned to see Officer Emmett. How come he kept running into her in all these different places? "So, who's our visitor? You know you're interrupting a private meeting," Johnny said in a threatening tone. Then he turned to his buddies and said, "She's a beauty, isn't she?" "Yeah, I like what I see," Greg added. "Why don't you come over here and have a seat?" Hearing their boorish comments, Officer Emmett started to get a little ticked off. Actually, she'd been aware of this group of thieves for a long time. Early this morning, she caught a break when she spotted them near one of the older cemeteries on the south side. It was pretty much abandoned, so it was surprising to see traffic there, especially so early in the day. She had figured they were up to something, so instead of heading to the station, she followed them here. It had turned out to be a long stakeout while she waited for Greg to come back, but she wanted more proof of how they were fencing their loot. Just as Officer Emmett had suspected, they'd robbed one of the mausoleums that were hidden back in the woods away from the Holy Redemption Cemetery's main entrance. Rumor had it that bootleggers had hidden a lot of their valuables in the cemeteries back in the 1920s. Maybe they had stumbled onto something. She wanted to call for backup, but the cell signal was really crappy down there under the street, especially in her hiding place behind a shipping container. Officer Emmett advised them, "You're under arrest. I've recorded your conversation and thanks for having it out here in public, where I wouldn't need a warrant. If you surrender quietly, I might ask the court to go easy on you." Johnny answered in a creepy tone, "I'll tell you what. Why don't you come with us? It can get pretty lonely down at the cemetery." Max added, "Good idea. I never seen such a pretty cop." In spite of her training in conflict resolution, Officer Emmett was getting irritated. "If you guys keep this up, I'll have to use force." She pulled her badge out of her pocket and informed them, "I'm Lieutenant Kelly Emmett of the Chicago Police Department. You're all under arrest." "I don't care who you are. We don't want you here," Johnny laughed. Then a few more men came out of the shadows and joined them. They started walking towards her. "I order you to stop." Emmett knew she was in trouble and she was kicking herself for not calling for backup.
Don't worry, I won't hurt you. Johnny, the group's leader, had a sadistic smile on his face. But these guys might. She ordered them again. Stop right there. Don't move. Emmett instinctively reached for her hip, but she wasn't in uniform, so her service weapon was locked up safely at the station. Great, now what am I going to do? She anxiously thought to herself. By then, the men had surrounded her. There were 6 of them. Just as Kevin was about to show himself, he saw Officer Emmett knock one of them to the ground with a beautiful sidekick. She moved like lightning. Kevin was impressed with her fighting skills. In less than a minute, 4 or 5 of them were on the ground, either unconscious or writhing in pain. Pretty good, Johnny said in surprise. She spoke to the 2 robbers who were still standing. Put your hands on your heads and kneel on the ground. Greg, the one who'd sold the painting to the Andersons, had been lying on the pavement. Emmett thought she had knocked him out, but she was wrong. The man jumped up, pulled out a switchblade, and held it to her throat. Not today, officer. It looks like maybe we're going to be arresting you instead, Johnny said as he motioned for the others to tie her up with their belts. Officer Emmett began to worry that they were interested in more than robbing graves. Just then, they were all surprised to hear a man's voice from the shadows. You guys really are scum. Grave robbery is one thing, but what were you thinking of doing to this nice lieutenant, one of Chicago's finest? They all looked over and saw Kevin deliberately walking out from behind a box truck while he brushed the dust off his clothes. Kevin? Officer Emmett exclaimed. Hurry up and call the police. Kevin heard her but kept moving forward. He didn't have any intention of leaving. Damn it, Greg, you let someone follow you? Johnny said in an annoyed tone of voice. Boss, don't worry, it's just the appraiser from the antique store. An appraiser? Johnny scoffed. They were all stunned, especially Officer Emmett. Kevin, run! Just call the police and we'll be fine, she shouted as she struggled against her restraints. Shut up, Johnny said as he grabbed her mouth and poured in a bottle of pills. After we deal with him, we'll get back to you, he snarled. Emmett coughed and asked him frantically, What did you just do? Don't be such a killjoy, he answered. You're going to take a nice nap. Officer Emmett struggled even more intensely when she heard this. What the hell is wrong with this guy? Kevin wondered. Then Greg shouted at Kevin. You followed me? I sold the painting and you guys bought it. Just business. What do you want now? Don't get excited, Kevin said calmly. Shouldn't you be thanking me? Why should I be thanking you? He shouted. Kevin shook his head and replied, If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have gotten a penny for your forgery. You saying it was a fake? The man asked in shock. Kevin saw the other thugs starting to move towards him. He ripped through them in seconds, tossing the large men left and right. Who the hell are you? The last man standing asked in horror. Kevin couldn't resist. Gritting his teeth, he snarled, Who am I? I'm an antiques appraiser. After he said this, the man fainted. Officer Emmett looked like she was in shock. Kevin knelt down next to her and started to remove her restraints. Are you all right? Do you think you can stand up? She didn't answer right away. She just shook her head in disbelief. Kevin took the belts and walked over to the unconscious men. He began to search their bodies as he tied them up. Looking through the pockets of the head gangster, Johnny, he found a pill bottle. What the heck is this? Kevin wondered. It could be worse, Officer Emmett said slowly. When he poured the pills in my mouth, he was so distracted by you that I managed to spit most of them out. She nodded over to the gross pile on the pavement. Kevin handed her the bottle so she could take a look at the label. Then she added, Yup, looks like they were tranquilizers. I may have swallowed a couple, but it would still be nice to get an ambulance down here right away. And a couple of squad cars. Can you get a signal down here? She asked him. Kevin nodded and then he took out his phone to call for help. The ambulance will be here soon, Kevin said as he slowly put away his phone. Officer Emmett looked at the 6 men lying on the asphalt tied up with their own belts. Then she stared at Kevin and hesitated for a few seconds before saying, Why are you here? Kevin pointed to one of the men lying on the ground and explained,
This guy sold a 17th century Dutch landscape to Anderson Antiques. I had my suspicions, so I followed him here. Officer Emmett believed him and didn't ask any more questions. After an awkward silence, Kevin asked her, I keep running into you, but I still don't know your name. Most people just call me Officer Emmett, she replied quietly. Then she added, Kelly Emmett. Kevin was surprised at this softer side that she was showing. Then Officer Emmett looked at Kevin with a serious expression and said, Tell me honestly, who are you really? Kevin didn't answer right away. He wasn't exactly sure what she meant. After thinking for a while, Officer Emmett rephrased her question. What I mean is, what school of martial arts are you from? Kevin was speechless. It sounded like she was talking about something from the movies. I'm sorry, I don't understand your question, he answered candidly. I know what I saw, Officer Emmett said seriously. When you defeated these men, your moves looked spontaneous, but I saw something deeper in your movements. I've studied martial arts for years, and I studied Eastern philosophy in college. You were keeping something from me. Kevin really didn't know how to respond. Officer Emmett, you stream a lot of kung fu movies in your off time, don't you? Do you still want to play dumb? She said sternly. Didn't you take an oath not to let outsiders see you using your techniques? I have no idea what you're talking about, he assured her. I used to practice some taekwondo when I was a kid. Everything I just did was entirely subconscious. Officer Emmett wasn't buying his explanation. So, you really think I'm mistaken? She muttered to herself. She was so convinced that Kevin started to get curious. Officer Emmett, what did you mean by what you said earlier? Kevin asked. Of course I'm talking about developing your inner power. Don't tell me you really don't know about this. Officer Emmett stared at Kevin while they waited for help to arrive. She continued explaining to Kevin. I've studied a few different martial arts. You saw me use them a little while ago. What's even more interesting to me is the study and development of life energy. A lot of people spend years working on this. You seem to be tapping into it without even trying. But you really should be careful. Without guidance, this can be very dangerous. It's even more important to avoid getting the attention of the people who want to keep all this a secret. This sounds like a comic book or something. Are you kidding me? Kevin asked in disbelief. Trust me, I'm deadly serious, Officer Emmett replied gravely. So are you one of these people? Kevin asked with a faint smile. The ones who are into all this stuff? Officer Emmett didn't answer Kevin's question right away. Her eyes were half closed, but she managed to talk some. There's a lot going on that the average person doesn't know about. And there are some very powerful people who have decided to put their energy into developing businesses, believe it or not. They've become wealthy entrepreneurs, and some of them have very powerful families. Her voice took on a very solemn tone, and she took a deep breath. Even with all her training, the few pills that she'd taken were starting to make her sleepy. They heard sirens approaching. Help was just a few blocks away now. Kevin counted 5 or 6 police cars heading towards them. Looks like the cavalry is here, Kevin said with a smile. Time for me to go. Wait, Officer Emmett said as she struggled to stand up, but she was feeling too sleepy. You're safe, and the grave robbery case has been solved. You know how to reach me if you need a statement. Do I really need to stay? Kevin asked. I'm not asking you to make a statement. I'm asking you to take me home, Officer Emmett said slowly. She wasn't feeling much like talking anymore. Why me? Help just arrived. Don't you want to go with them? Kevin asked in confusion. Don't worry about it. Can you please do this for me? She asked quietly. She didn't want to admit to Kevin that she was embarrassed for letting the gang of robbers get the best of her. She'd never be able to live it down, and it could undermine her authority at the precinct. I guess I could take you home. Do you think you can walk? Kevin asked her. Do you think you could carry me? Emmett asked him. Her voice was barely audible. Kevin nodded and waited for the officers to arrive. Officer Emmett mustered enough strength to give them their orders so they could take the men to the station for processing. Kevin supported her as they walked slowly to her car, which was parked on the street above this underground loading dock. She wasn't very heavy, so nobody suspected just how much Kevin was actually helping her. Kevin managed to get Officer Emmett home safely. He eased her into a recliner in her living room, then he sat down on the sofa and wiped the sweat from his forehead. He looked around and wondered out loud. What's the average salary in the police department these days? He knew that a house in this neighborhood cost at least $500,000. "My mom bought it for me," Officer Emmett said sleepily. She paused for a moment and then asked him, "I'm really curious. How did you get your strength? I could feel your power as you carried me in." Before Kevin could reply, she asked him, "If you haven't gotten it through any special training, did you have any help from someone?" "Help?" Kevin frowned. He thought of the 2 pills Cook had given him. They were supposed to help him restore his strength. Maybe they did something more. "What have those pills done to me?" Kevin wondered. "If you don't want to tell me, I won't force you. But remember one thing. Try not to let anyone see just how much power you have. Otherwise..." Officer Emmett yawned and changed the subject. "Sit down and rest for a while. I'm a little tired." Then she closed her eyes and fell asleep. "I can't believe she trusts me enough to let me in her home like this," Kevin thought to himself. Then he thought again about what Emmett had said. Kevin wondered about the 2 pills Cook had given him, and he quickly took out his phone and called his friend. Cook answered in his deep voice.
"Hi, Kevin. What's up?"
"Mitch, I want to know what was in those pills you gave me," Kevin said directly.
"Let me think about it. One of them was supposed to help boost your energy levels, and the other was supposed to help you with your focus," he replied. Then he asked, "Why are you suddenly asking me about this? Are you having a problem because of the pills?"
"No, don't worry. I'm fine," Kevin smiled before adding, "Just curious. I'll let you get back to work." Then he sent a quick text to his office to have his car dropped off around the corner from Officer Emmett's house. No explanations necessary. It's good to be the CEO, he thought. Kevin put his phone back in his pocket and looked back at Officer Emmett, who was sleeping soundly in her recliner. He sat back and looked around the room while he wondered what was going on in his body. His eyes fell on the top shelf of her bookcase. There were a lot of martial arts books, guides to natural health, but there were also a couple of old books with tattered spines. Kevin walked over and took them down. The first one he opened was a very old translation of an ancient book on training your ki, your inner power. He was surprised to find that it talked a lot about what Officer Emmett had been saying about training your internal energy. It was a quick read, maybe because of his recent improvement in his focus. Kevin put that book aside and flipped open another one. It talked about the yin and yang, negative and positive energy, and harmony, as well as some ways to make natural medications. Kevin lost track of time and read throughout the night. When Officer Emmett woke up and saw that Kevin was still there, she immediately jumped up from her chair. "Why haven't you left yet?" "Well, you asked me to bring you back here, and then you fell asleep. How could I let you sleep alone in the living room? What if those guys have accomplices and they want to harm you?" Kevin explained. "Even so, it wasn't appropriate," she said, looking slightly embarrassed. "It can be our little secret," Kevin said while leaning back on the sofa. He didn't look like someone who had been up all night. On the contrary, he looked very energetic. Kevin suddenly remembered the pills that Officer Emmett had been forced to swallow the day before, and he asked her, with the concern showing in his voice, "How are you doing now?" "It was only a couple of them. I keep myself in pretty good shape, so I think I'm getting over it," she replied. "I just wish I could have developed my internal energy more, like in those books you've been reading," she said as she nodded at the pile of old books that Kevin had taken down from her shelf. "Oh, I'm sure it isn't all that hard," Kevin teased her. Officer Emmett raised an eyebrow. She felt that he didn't know just how long that kind of training could take. "You wouldn't understand if I told you. Anyway, I think it's time for you to leave," she said impatiently. "I have to go to work." Kevin just sat there with a cryptic smile on his face. "Why aren't you leaving yet? Do you want me to call a squad car for you or something?" Her annoyance was starting to show. "I've got something here and I hope it can help you," Kevin said as he slowly took a reddish-brown pill from his pocket. Last night, Kevin had followed the instructions in the book on alternative medicine to come up with something he thought could help Officer Emmett recover more quickly. "Did you use one of the herbal recipes in that book? What's it supposed to do?" Officer Emmett asked. You could tell she had her doubts, but for some reason she trusted Kevin. She was tempted to try it.